Okay, I believe we're live. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Senecal, and I'm so excited to be here with Andra Watkins. She has become a real friend to our organization. We've been talking with Andra about the lightest of subjects since early last year, which is primarily Project 2025 and what it would do to our country if Trump were elected. And hey, now we need to have those conversations about, I don't want to do the I told you so's, but here is what it looks like now being implemented. So, Andra, welcome back again for another cheery conversation about Project 2025.
It's such an honor to be here. I mean, you write about something for so long, and I wrote so much about Project 2025 last year, and it makes me sick that most of it has come to pass. You never want to feel good about that, but at the same time, I hope people can look at that track record and say, this is a person who's worth listening to. I can't predict the future, but really what we did with Project 2025 was just read what it said and say, this is what it means. And that enough Americans couldn't value that is really sad. So I hope going forward, more Americans will put more investment in that.
It is sad, and it's becoming more sad all the time because what was theoretical until November of last year is now we're still talking about it a lot as tariff policy and tax policy and cutbacks because of Doge. But this is real people having their lives devastated in ways that are completely out of their control. And there's still some things that we can do to try to mitigate the damage. And obviously having conversations like this, I want to talk some about the tariffs. You had a great piece yesterday. Andra's Substack is for a time such as this. It's on Substack. I cannot recommend you subscribe to it highly enough. It is deeply researched, fact-based, and you are talking about things that nobody else is getting granular about the way that you are, and it's absolutely invaluable. So can you talk to us a little bit about the piece that you wrote yesterday and what you are seeing, both in how they relate to what Project 2025 said it was going to do and what it is Trump is doing with his latest things that he's doing with tariffs as of Wednesday?
Right. So Project 2025 delved into tariffs. Tariffs was going to be their primary way of punishing communist China. Every time China was mentioned, it was communist China. Communist China is terrible. Communist China needs to be punished. So a lot of the tariffs in Project 2025 were targeted at China. Peter Navarro wrote some of that section of Project 2025, and we've had to look at his unlovely face, on the news in the lead up to this.
Recently incarcerated Peter
Yes,
Navarro.
when he should be in jail still, but we've had to look at him on the news talking about how wonderful these tariffs are going to be for everybody. Project 2025 did not recommend worldwide punitive tariffs on practically every country on the planet except Russia. It did not. So this is a Trumpian escalation of policy positions that Project 2025 took. It's really just a nuclear explosion of ramping things up from what Project 2025 recommended. And he's surrounded himself by people who believe this is good for whatever reason. But, the J.D. Vance part of that crowd and his, mentor Peter Thiel and Curtis Yarvin and all of them, destroying the country is the goal. for that segment of of his group that he's listening to. So destroying the economy, destroying the dollar so that they can replace it with cryptocurrency that's not regulated by a government, destroying all of our safety net, having billionaires be able to take over all the resources, and to them, we human beings are resources that can be exploited. You know, this is what I called the new feudalism yesterday, where we are the serfs in that scenario, and they use AI to do as much as possible to push us to do whatever we have to do to survive. Peter Thiel has his Palantir group that is doing surveillance. So they would use AI to surveil us like they do in China with WeChat. And that's part of what one of my recent guests, who is a Microsoft cybersecurity expert, has talked about Doge being. Doge is really a nation state internal cyber attack that has been ongoing since he first went into the first place. And that's how it's been carried out from the perspective of cybersecurity experts. So that's the kind of data that he's been gathering, stealing from us as taxpayers and as citizens of the United States. So that, I mean, she thinks so that he can set up X as a version of WeChat that all Americans have to use for everything and be surveilled 24/7 by AI. So it's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And the tariffs, to me, are a big part of destroying all of our safety nets, destroying our economy. You know, we read in January in my democracy reading group, we read Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny. And one of the quotes in the new epilogue was from the current president, where he was admiring 1930s regime change and how efficient and great it was. And he said, what makes it happen is when everything goes to hell and everything's a disaster and it's just hell on earth, and then we can make it happen. And so that's what they're doing with these tariffs. And that's how I tried to talk about it yesterday.
Yeah, and you know, people who support Trump, or you know, those who really haven't paid attention but want to believe what he's saying now, you know, what is coming out of the president's mouth, that you know, this is going great. You know, since his announcement of blanket 10% tariffs, this is going just as planned. It's perfect. It's, you know, we're about to see.
I'm going to go play golf now with the
Yeah, I'm going to go play
Saudis.
golf instead of, you know, being present when service members who were killed are going to be brought back. Instead, he's going to be going to a Saudi-owned golf tournament, which is, you know, a whole other grifting, corrupt story. But people want to believe that what he's saying is true. The boom is about to happen. I was reading this morning all sorts of people saying, see, everything's fine. The jobs report came out and it's a strong jobs report. And just the lack of economic understanding, or the American people's
is
attempt
appalling.
to process this, that you think the jobs report that reflects March is going to show the impact of tariffs that were imposed in April. I mean, it's just so completely nonsensical. There is no way that it is evidence that the tariffs weren't bad, because you're looking at data of something that was happening before they existed. So how, in the way that you try to talk about this, do you get, how do we get the American people to better understand it's bad now? This is the beginning. This now has not a ripple effect. This has a tidal effect.
Right. And unfortunately, having been a member of Christian nationalism myself and being indoctrinated in that cult-like environment, it is a cult-like environment. And MAGA is a cult-like environment. And so, you know, unfortunately for a lot of people, the only thing that breaks that spell is suffering. And they're getting ready to have a lot of that. and some of them will realize that they contributed to their own problems, but many of them will keep doubling down and doubling down and doubling down until they can't anymore. So it's going to be an interesting time. There, in my view now, somebody's asked how to stop this. Certainly, the Senate has proposed bipartisan legislation to limit the president's ability to declare tariffs. Whether or not his gaslighter in chief in the House will bring that bill, a version of that bill, to the floor in the House, I bet not. But, you know, the Senate is at least trying to do something. But you know, the Republican Party has allowed this because they've wanted to destroy the federal government for a long time. So I don't know how we stop this now. And, you know, furthermore, nothing, even if we stop it, even if we were able to remove this government from office, even if we were, if Republicans suddenly fell on their heads and grew brains and decided we're going to impeach him and remove him, and we're not going to go down this road, our time as American, as a world economic power and as a democratic power is over. You know, that is what has happened over the past week or two. And these tariffs were just the latest straw in that. I mean, we cannot be depended upon to be an economic power, an economic leader. We cannot be depended upon to be a military power, which is why Europe is arming itself and working together amongst their own countries to produce their own arms now. Because when Pete Hegseth says, well, we have buttons and can turn things off when people try to do things with them we don't like, or we're not going to send Ukraine, that was our ally 6 months ago, things to repair the weapons that we sold them, you know, that sends a really strong message to the world that America is no longer reliable. And that's not going to change because we don't have this president in power anymore. We have shown ourselves as people that we are not reliable because we allowed this to happen.
Yeah, Jonathan Last had a great piece last night talking about, you know, the end of the United States being.
I read it.
Yeah, and it's sobering, but dead on. We made these choices to withdraw ourselves from leadership positions in all the areas that you just discussed. And we started to do this the first time Trump was in office, right? We let NATO know, like, we're not really a reliable part of NATO anymore, unless you do what we want. But still, you know, if Trump could have pulled out, he would have. And you know, we had tariffs 1.0 during his first term. And what so many people don't seem to understand is when these tariffs are imposed and other countries make these shifts that they have to in response to what we're doing, they don't just shift back if we decide to pull a 10% or a 55% or 60% tariff, or, you know, whatever.
Or if we say, haha, we were kidding, we're not going to do it now.
Because,
I mean, they're not.
Haha, next week we might not be kidding. And you can't run a country and you can't run a business with that kind of uncertainty, which is why the markets are, for a second day, in a very bad place, because we all know the markets don't like uncertainty, and there's nothing but uncertainty when you have a Trump administration, and it's even worse now. So I think there were a lot of countries and individuals who are willing to try to rebuild trust. After we had a first term of Trump, he was defeated. Biden brought back a stability in a far more traditional. He was what people expected of a U.S. president, and the policies moved much more back to what you expect. I don't think we get a third chance, because we've now proven we can go back to that, and then we choose not that moving
Mhm.
forward. So what is the reason that if we pull these tariffs off, anyone would decide, oh, this probably isn't going to happen again, or even in 2028, when somehow we get Trump out of office, because I don't think he's going to be just packing his bags and leaving voluntarily the way he didn't the first time, and he sure as shit isn't behaving in a more responsible way the second time around.
Right.
But even if that happens, what rebuilds the trust of the world with the United States to even let us start working our way back to being trusted again?
I don't think anything will in my lifetime. Eventually, I think we could get back there, but this is a longer term proposition than a lot of Americans have the stomach for. I wrote in a comment reply to someone yesterday on my post about new feudalism and the tariffs. Um, I don't live in the United States anymore. And I talked a lot last year as I was writing about what Americans value and what Americans don't value. And I said a bunch of times, just like Jonathan Last and the Bulwark did last night, Americans are going to have the government we deserve. In November, we're going to elect the government we deserve based on the value systems that we have. And one of the things that we don't value is long-term thinking and long-term strategizing and proactivity and long-term investment. And my work was an example of that, because that's all I talked about is here's what's coming. Don't do this. Don't pick what's behind door number 2, America, because you won't like what you find there. It's going to be really bad.
And you should know what you're going to find there, because they published an effing book.
Right.
Explaining all of it.
And it's all dismissed as silly and hysterical, and they won't do that, and all the usual things
fear-mongering and blah, blah,
that
blah.
Americans do, because they don't value long-term anything as a group. And a country that doesn't value that is going to fail. And so that was one of the primary reasons that I left when I did, because you can't continually say, I only want to think about the past. Your example about the jobs report and saying, well, the tariffs aren't going to hurt us is an example of that. Instead of looking forward a few months and going, what could the jobs report be then? This is going to be terrible. It's, oh, well, the March report was fine, so this is fine. It's that mentality that Americans have, so many Americans have, that led to this. And the only thing now that's going to change that mentality is suffering the consequences of it, in my opinion. Somebody asked in the chat, why are we complying with the presidential immunity ruling? And, because Republicans want to. Right. That's why, Congress could rein in a lot of this, and could have already reined in a lot of this, and made it from the get-go to be that the president couldn't be a dictator, because Congress has the power to rein in the president as part of our checks and balances system designed into our Constitution. But the Republican Party decided not to do that. Right. So, that's why nothing's happening to him. And just because he has presidential immunity doesn't mean Elon Musk does, who's the co-president. It doesn't mean anyone in his cabinet does. So, all the lawlessness that's happening, none of them should be able to get away with that with presidential immunity, because they're not the president. So, that's my answer to that, Debbie.
I do think, in part because of the conversation I listened to Simon Rosenberg having with Stuart Stevens earlier this week, is that one of the things in our language, both, everybody watching this, but also anybody who has a platform and still believes that we should attempt to be a democracy, is to be calling these people out as it is criminal behavior. They're not exceeding norms. They're not breaking the conventions. They're breaking laws, and they are criminals. And
Right.
there are historical examples of governments that become lawless and people being held to account when that government is no longer in office. And I think one of the things that can mitigate to some degree, at least make people pause and think about what's happening and what they're doing, is that it's very possible that there are going to be real legal complications for them. There are going to be repercussions for their criminal conduct when Trump is no longer in office. And I apologize, my dog is welcoming someone to my house. So sorry, folks.
Oh,
Yeah, he's 90 pounds and he's real loud.
well, that's all right.
Yeah, hopefully
it's good
that's
to have
not
a
gonna,
dog mascot on an
yes,
interview. I like that.
hopefully it's not going to go on for long. Thank you, Fezzik. But yeah, that naming the criminality, calling out what people are doing. Trump is a criminal. He is a convicted criminal. Charges may have been dropped for other things, but he has convictions now. He has, like we were saying, Peter Navarro, recently released from prison. These are the people who has around him, and those repercussions for the conduct that's happening now. There was some accountability before. There will be more accountability for these people in the future, and their legacies are not going to be the imagined progress they created during the Trump administration. Their legacies are going to be that they at least attempted to destroy the American democracy and crush our economy and turn us into a techno-feudalist state. And they broke a lot of laws
Techno-feudalist,
along the
fascist
way.
state. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very hard for me to watch all this. And you get an extra layer of distance when you're not in it. So I've been having people from other countries on my Substack to talk about how they see what's happening in the United States. And most of them are just really heartbroken. It's not America deserves this. It's not, well, you're not really that exceptional anyway, and you never were. It's most of my friends who aren't American are just bewildered that Americans would throw away their democracy and their freedom and without so much thought. Somebody asked in the chat if only 4% of the voters knew about Project 2025. Can that be true? I'm not sure. It's 4%, but it was very, very low.
Very small.
And it was designed to repel reading. I mean, it was a chore to read that thing all the way through. It had a lot of really awful things in it, but they buried a lot of the meat behind about 250 pages of legalese to get to the real bad stuff. And so it was designed for people to pick it up and go, I'm not reading this. I can't process. I'm going to put it down. On top of which 54% of American adults can't read at a 6th grade level. Right. So they're not going to pick up a tome like that and read it. And the mainstream corporate media decided not to cover it.
Right.
So, a few of us did what we could to shriek about it. And, Rick and Resolute Square were kind enough to elevate me last May, I think, on Substack. And that helped more Americans find it. That was one of the first bumps that helped more Americans find it. But it never got to be enough. Because it wasn't designed for people to want to find out about it. That was its purpose.
Yeah, and beyond the legalese, one of the things that you really taught me, your experience coming out of Christian nationalism, you have the magic decoder ring when you're reading Project 2025 to see all the Christian nationalist um, buzzwords, phrases, the language you grew up with, that for somebody who isn't steeped in that world, you read it and they're words, and they don't have any significant additional layers of meaning, but you see that, and anyone who at this point doesn't understand the tie between the policies of Project 2025 and Christian nationalism's objectives. I again encourage you to go back and read a lot of what Andra has written, because we're not just headed for a feudalistic state, but we're talking about a single religion, Christo-fascist. Maybe the tech bros are at the top of the food chain, but what is coming is a Christo-fascist state if they are allowed to achieve their objectives.
And let's talk some about some headlines that we've seen that relate to that. I mean, Russ Vought is just one of the worst people, but him and Stephen Miller are just two of the worst people alive. Yeah. And we don't talk about them nearly enough. Yeah. And they're probably writing the majority of these executive orders for him, and they're using templates from Project 2025. So let's talk about the revocation of Title 10 funding that just happened, to defund reproductive clinics that are affiliated with Planned Parenthood, to drive family planning into these religious organizations that will only support the notion that a family, and this was said multiple times in Project 2025, is one man married to one unrelated woman with as many children as God gives them. And they don't use birth control. Project 2025 only endorsed fertility awareness-based methods, which is the Catholic rhythm calendar and timing method of birth control, which, doesn't
that
work.
Works. Yeah, really well. So, if anyone remembers the very large Catholic families that lots of us grew up knowing.
My husband's one of those. I mean, his mother was pregnant like 8 times in 10 years, and
I think
and wound up with 5 children. He's going to correct me. 8 times in 6 years, he says.
Wow. Yeah, I grew up with schoolmates who had siblings in elementary school in almost every grade. There were like 7 or 8 of them, and there was one from 2nd to 8th grade in every class.
So that executive order is drawn directly from Project 2025. And the goal of it is multifaceted. They want to close down any clinic where a woman can get contraception, can be counseled and given real sex education that is not what I grew up with, which is just don't have it, and we're not going to tell you what it is, and don't have it, and don't let boys touch you. And if a boy touches you, it's your fault because you're a slut and you let him do it.
Stop being a temptress.
You end up getting pregnant, it's your fault. That's what I grew up with. And that's what they give people. They give women in these clinics. It's what they teach in schools when they get the abstinence-based education in as well. So they're doing that. They're counseling people to get married. They're counseling people who have been raped to carry the child to term, to not do anything with it, to not put it up for adoption, to question whether or not they were assaulted. They're taking taxpayer public funds and giving it to these private religious institutions that give this kind of counseling to people. They're also telling people behind the scenes, and we saw this play out in a different way that I'll talk about in a minute this week, that the real design of a family is for the man to be the breadwinner. Project 2025 used that word. And the woman to be the caregiver and the homemaker and stay home and take care of the children while the husband is the breadwinner. So let's apply that definition to Anna Paulina Luna's great effort this week to get women and men too, who are new parents in Congress and the House, to be able to vote by proxy, and how Mike Johnson and the so-called pro-family Republican Party responded to that. They shot her down. And so, and that was all, she wouldn't agree to go along with the SAVE Act, which would strip many, many women of the right to vote in the United States, and would make it really difficult for people like Anna Paulina Luna to be congressional representatives or to hold any elected office.
Is the goal, right?
Exactly.
Even in the Republican Party, if there are women in the Republican Party holding office in that party who think that they have some special status and will be given different rights than the rest of us are going to be given, this is a great example this week of not a snowball's chance in hell are you going to be treated differently. The goal is to have a white male Congress.
Christian male
Yes,
Congress.
like Christian male Congress, for women to be back home, for federal funding to go, part of the decision about how to distribute federal infrastructure funding should be based on birth rates in communities. This is not need, not prioritizing what has to be done, but the more babies that are being made in those communities, the greater chance you have to get federal funds. And as you mentioned, the SAVE Act, which has numerous elements to it that are tremendous barriers to, they want married families, but it's married women who are going to have the most difficult time overcoming the hurdles of voter registration that are in the SAVE Act, because most women still change their last names so they don't match their birth certificates.
Exactly. And so one of the things that I've been telling every woman that is listening to me, if you've already changed your name, get a passport with that name on it. If you don't have one, get copies of your birth certificates. This birth certificate thing has come up too much on the Republican side. I ordered 15 or 20 copies of my birth certificate from the red state I was born in December, because I was like, I'm not going to have them telling me I need a copy of that. And then you go to your red state as a woman and they're like, oh, well, it'll be a year before we can give you that. Once they can require that, it's going to be so much harder for the people who need them to get them. So order those birth certificates now and have them and keep them somewhere safe, because somehow they're going to require, I know in Florida, one of my readers told me she had to take a birth certificate to renew her driver's license. So the other piece of advice I'm giving to women is be like me and don't take your husband's name. If you're not yet married, don't take his name. Just keep your name, because, that's a way to avoid some of this. So get a passport, get copies of your birth certificates, and have those on hand. Women who are listening to me, every one of you, do it today.
Yeah. And, we always try to give some action items that people can do, because we're not powerless. There are things that we can all be doing right now. And I would add to the list that we give, if you have young women of any age who are loved ones, not necessarily related to them, but just people you care about, and you know that they don't have the funds to be able to get a passport, to get a copy of their birth certificate, help out women in your community to do that, because these are real financial barriers for people to be able to come up with the money. It's not cheap to get a passport.
Yeah, I mean, I can give an example. I was born in Tennessee. I did not live in Tennessee for most of my life. If I walked into the office in Nashville to get a copy of my birth certificate, it was $15 a copy. But the way I had to do it, because I don't live there, it ended up costing me over $100. So there are real financial barriers to doing some of these things, and they're going to get worse.
Right. Which, again, is intentional, because they don't want lower income voters voting. They don't want women voting. They don't want, it's more of a burden for people of color, especially older people of color, because for a lot of folks, those birth certificate records don't exist. So you can't even get a copy of your birth certificate. So you cannot then get a passport. So, and for young people, most young people don't have passports. They don't have copies of their birth certificates. They're, living in places, if they're attending schools or other types of training, they're in places that they weren't born. So getting a birth certificate becomes difficult because of that. So, yeah, I guess I will leave everyone at the end of our very uplifting conversation here this morning. But God, I know this isn't cheery stuff. It's stuff we have to be talking about.
Right. I mean,
there's no time to bury our heads in the sand about what is happening every single day now.
Right. It's not something that we can take a break from, unfortunately. We can certainly do self-care. And I strongly recommend that people figure out what those things are, because they're all individual. I mean, I read smut romance novels as my self-care, and it's delightful, but that doesn't, I'm very proud of that. It doesn't help, a lot of other people, but that's what does it for me. So, we all have to have those things. Somebody's asked what else we can do. You and I both have recommended using 5calls.org to call our representatives daily and talk to them about different things we're unhappy with. I periodically give people scripts on my Substack, and I think y'all do that as well, of things that we need to be calling them about. So that's one thing we can do. But I think it's even more effective to go to their offices, their local offices. People like Tom Tillis never have anybody in their local office in North Carolina. But, some people, if you live close to a local office, go to the office, talk to the people in there, tell them what you're upset about, demand answers. I have a reader who lives in Maine who calls Susan Collins's office every day and asks, and says, I demand a response from the senator to this question. And then she'll ask her question. And, the people in the office are now, oh my God, not this woman again. Eventually, you end up getting something for those kinds of investments too. So going to the offices, go to a rally tomorrow in your area for the Act Now protests that are happening. Absolutely look up online what you need to do to protect yourself. Wear a mask, wear sunglasses, take food and snacks and water. Don't take your cell phone, because they're going to be tracking people. There are a number of good resources online to look up about effective protesting, where you can protect yourself, protect your identity,
understand what the rules specific to your area are. If there's a march, if you need to be staying on the sidewalks, know that you need to be staying on the sidewalks. Stepping in the roads could be impeding traffic, and you just be smart about it, but be a participant. I'll add to the putting pressure on our members of Congress. If they aren't holding town halls in your district, demand that they hold town halls. And if the Republicans won't do it, go to Democratic members of Congress and ask them to hold town halls in those Republican districts, because
increasingly they're doing that.
I mean,
one of my readers in North Carolina organized an empty chair town hall for Tom Tillis, and I was like, put a rubber chicken in the chair with his name on it. These people are elected representatives. They are accountable to us as the people, and they should be doing these town halls and facing their constituents.
They should. And there are cracks. We have seen, some cracks because of the tariffs, but we know in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania district special election, that flipped to a Democrat. That doesn't happen, folks. That is a conservative area. We know what happened in Florida with those margins being cut in half in red districts. That happened before the tariffs. If Trump had announced this stuff on Monday, those Tuesday elections, I'm not saying that the Democrats in Florida would have won, but I'm
the
sure
margins
that
would have been even
15%
closer.
would have, yes, gotten even closer. We had that fantastic win in Wisconsin with Susan Crawford. So my point is the activism is working. It overcame Elon Musk's money and notoriety and his incredibly large digital megaphone he has because of Twitter. We can do this. It is not impossible, and people are waking up. We just have to keep that pressure going, and more people, there are going to be more reasons, as we started this conversation, more reasons people are going to be forced to wake up, because things are going to have very direct impact on their lives when the cost of everything continues to increase.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it is not an exaggeration. This is the biggest tax increase in a century.
Yes.
And I really think businesses ought to put Trump tax in a line item on every invoice and every receipt to show people who buy things what they're paying more because of these tariffs.
Yeah.
It's a huge tax increase on
It is.
Americans.
And the people it hurts the most are low and middle income people. And a lot of those folks are seniors living on fixed incomes, because if you get $650 a week, whether it's Social Security or that's what you're earning, that money, you don't have the option to take a portion of your earnings and not put it into the economy. All of that money is what you need for your basic elements of survival. And so your money is going to hit tariffs on everything. If you're rich, you can meet your basics with only a small portion of your income. The rest of it is disposable, and you can choose to do something else with it right now rather than spend it and pay an extra 25% on a car being brought in from outside the United States. Hold off on the purchase, do something else. But but for people who spend all of their money on food and electricity
Being alive,
and heat
exactly.
and rent or mortgages, it hits 100% of your income. And
Well,
that
and
is
and there are probably a lot of people here in this boat. The other group that it's going to hit really hard are small business owners.
yes.
Because I mean, one of my favorite small businesses in my former neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina, was a cheese and wine store that I could walk to. And, you know, most of the stuff in there came in from other places. That was one of the reasons I loved it. I could go and get really wonderful imported goods and have them at home and feel like I was visiting all these other countries. And a business like that is not going to survive these tariffs, because everything that they bring in there is going to be so much more expensive to import now. And they can't, you know, they have to pass. The margins for a business like that are already small. So, you know, if they try to pass along the extra cost, people aren't going to absorb it.
People.
So there are so many small businesses that are going to fail because of this. Because I mean, I've been a small business owner for 25 years. You don't often get rich doing that. You do it because you love it and you can survive doing it and make a living, but it's not something that there's a whole lot of extra, you know, to spread around.
And a lot of folks are still just recovering from COVID.
Exactly. So, you know, this is going to be really hard,
not absorbable
on that group. So I did give, and I know you probably need to wrap up in a minute, and I have a question for you before we go, but I do want to give people some other quick things that they can think about. I wrote a lot of these things yesterday in my post, in my newsletter about this new feudalism. But if you have not diversified your money, now would be a good time to think about getting it into a smaller bank that can support offline banking in the event that banks fail or the internet goes down. So Start talking to your banks about offline banking. Start breaking the chains. If you've gotten tax refunds from the federal government, electronic filing directly into a bank account, don't use that account anymore. That account's compromised. So move your stuff to a different account and try to break, or a different bank, and try to break that chain so that they can't follow you. Have some cash on hand in case something happens and things melt down, and that's the only way you can pay for things for a bit. Put your money in cash in your 401ks. Look at the markets, obviously, but they're not going to be going up again anytime soon. So we converted all of our stuff to cash and short-term government stuff 2 or 3 months ago. And my broker was like, "What's the matter with you? You're insane." Most of them vote conservative. Most of them voted for this. So, I was like, I don't care what you think. I want it all in cash. I don't care how you feel about it. So, unfortunately, that's going to be one of the ways to try to preserve some of this real boom that we had in the stock market. Even with the fall that we've had, we still have a lot of gains that people have made that they could preserve if they put money in a cash holdings within a 401k fund, and most allow you to do that. So think about that. Those were some things that I recommended yesterday. Get a fireproof safe to have at your house, and put things like your birth certificate and your passport and your deeds and bank statements that you've printed out, your social security statement if you that you printed out, the title to your car, your pension statements if you have a pension, insurance policies, anything like that, your health insurance records. One of the biggest compromises Doge has done is gotten in our healthcare system. And so my cybersecurity expert is predicting that we're going to have healthcare system outages. When you try to go to the doctor, they're not going to be able to pull up your healthcare records. So print out a copy of those if you can and have them. Don't store things in the cloud and think that's going to be enough. Store it either on site at your house, on a drive, or in a fireproof safe that you printed out in case something happens. So those are things that sound insane. They sound crazy. I've also got people who are joining bartering groups and hoarding things to barter, and I don't think that's crazy either. I've got readers who've bought generators. I don't think that any of that's crazy. So those are some other things that I've recommended as things melt down from this, and they're going to. They're absolutely going to, that we can do to try to protect ourselves in our immediate communities. So I hope, as depressing and awful as it is, I hope having some action steps and some things to focus on to do helps with the stress of what's ahead.
Yeah, I think anytime people can feel less powerless, that's a very positive in a situation like this, because you need to remind yourself in as many ways as you can that you're not powerless. These things are happening. They're happening because of large forces at this point, but we still have a lot of control over our lives and our immediate communities. And so taking care of our immediate communities, building more community than you're used to having, get to know the people around you, and build those relationships, because we're all going to need each other more and more as this goes on. And it's not a bad thing anyway. We're all too isolated to begin with, but use this as a reason to introduce yourself to your neighbors when you see them, and really start building a community of trust around you.
I told people after the election, go around your neighborhood and remember who had the Kamala signs in the yard, and have Thanksgiving with them instead of your MAGA relatives this year. There are all kinds of things, that we've done to communicate what we feel. And so building these communities takes time. And given how screen oriented we've become, it's harder and it's awkward, but it's an important thing to be doing.
Yeah, I agree.
It's really valuable. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Is your dog named Fezzik because you like The Princess Bride? It's
Yes.
my favorite movie of all
It's
time.
the best movie ever. Yes. Fezzik, for people who don't know, is the gentle giant in The Princess Bride. And he is my dog's namesake. Yes, we
When
we
you
love
told me
that
that, I was like,
movie.
oh, that's my favorite movie. It's got to be where that came from. I have to ask her about
It is. I've tried to find other names that will work that are shorter, but for additional pets that we have, and haven't figured out others that really work. Inigo Montoya is a lot to say when you're calling your dog. Fezzik is easier, but yeah, I'm so glad you're a fan. I'm not shocked you're a fan. Well, this is good. Here's our final piece of advice. If you haven't, or even if you have hundreds of times watched The Princess Bride, watch it again, because
you'll feel so much
make you
better.
feel good.
It is like great self-care.
It
I
is.
mean, when I met my husband, he'd never seen it. And he was like, I will hate that movie. I'm not watching that. And then about 10 minutes into it, he's over there like trying not to laugh.
Yeah.
And by the end, he's like, it's a really good movie.
Really good movie for any age. Safe for everybody. Watch it with
love it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. I love talking with you. Everybody, please, for such a time as this is her Substack. Go and subscribe to it. It's really important, actionable, deep, fact-based information, written in a way that we can all understand and absorb it. And it's important. So thank you, Andra, for the work that you keep doing, and for always being willing to talk with us, because
I'm
we love your big
always
dream.
happy to. So if you want to do it again sometime, let me know.
Absolutely. All right. Take care of
Okay.
yourself. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Okay. Bye.